Chapter 35. The 25 families of Gaul village were a production team that was part of a brigade composed of several village production teams. The brigades were organized further into communes. The commune headquarters had a general store, a middle school, a clinic, and a meeting house for party officials. It was a 30-minute walk from Gaul village. Old Crab, the team leader, was the only Communist Party member in Gaul village. He dressed in a tattered green uniform that was always caked with dried mud and bits of food. With his party membership and his appointment by the brigade as a team leader, he acquired absolute power over the villagers. Although the passengers sometimes made fun of him, they also feared him. They carefully courted his favor and never pushed their barbed jibs too far. If he felt anyone was challenging his authority, he threatened them and waved a copy of the party rules in their face. "I can have you shot," was his common warning, and everyone knew he could. If he passed our house and smelled food, he invited himself inside for a meal, always helping himself to the largest portion. Mama had brought 2 beds from Hefei to Gaul village, but there was space for only one in the quarters assigned to us. She kept the second bed with the farming equipment in the storage section adjoining our living space in the shed. One afternoon, I heard someone rummaging clumsily in the storage area. I peered over the low wall dividing the space from ours and saw Old Crab. He looked at me and mumbled, I saw an extra bed here. My nephew is getting married and he needs it. I'm borrowing yours." Of course, Old Crab never borrowed anything. He took what he wanted or needed, and it never reappeared. If he took our second bed, I knew we would never see it again. As he pulled it from a stack of our belongings, I blurted out, "You can't have that." He eyed me and was highly annoyed by my objection. "Shut up," he spat at me. "Why don't you go collect some shit?" As he turned to leave with the bed, I scrambled over the wall and grabbed a corner of the frame. "This is my bed," I yelled, "and you cannot have it." He attempted to jerk it away from me, but I hung on and screamed, "Don't you dare scream! Steal my bed! Don't you dare steal my bed!" He tried to pull and kick me at the same time. We moved out the door to the area in front of the shed, each hanging on to an end of the frame. Old Crab kicking and trying not to lose his balance. "Damn you! Let go! This is mine now. I am the boss," he shouted. Although he was accustomed to intimidating adults, I don't think he'd ever been challenged by a child. Especially not a determined 11-year-old girl. He planted his feet to make a final pull on the frame to force it from my hands. As he did, I released my grip. He stumbled backward and fell flat on the ground. He let go of the bed and jumped up with his fists clenched to beat me. I ran into the house, closed the door, and blocked it. He pounded on the door, unable to force it open, and threatened to kill me. After a string of obscenities, he left me alone, picked up the bed, and stumbled away. As he did, I opened the door a crack and shook my fist at him and yelled, "You can't keep my bed, old crab! I'm going to come and get it back." At my words, he dropped the frame and rushed the door. I slammed it shut and blocked it. After hitting it twice and threatening me, he resumed his theft. Old Crab exempted himself from common labor. He declared that it was his official duty to make sure everyone else worked. Each morning, just after sunrise, he marched through the village, blowing a whistle and banging on his broken gun, shouting, "The sun is shining in your asshole. Get up! Go to work! Go to work!" As the villagers emerged from their dwellings, he told them that their daily assignment was to go to this or that field and do this or that. Once the villagers had begun their daily task, he walked to the brigade headquarters or the store where he might find party officials from other villages and confer with them. After a few drinks and a few cigarettes, he made a circuit of the fields, checking to see that everyone else was working. After that, he returned to the village and searched for men who might be shirking their duties or women who were alone. One autumn morning, I overslept and departed for school late. As I passed one of the small huts near the edge of the village, I saw a shadowy figure crawling next to the back wall and then disappearing around a corner. I became curious. I left the main path and padded to another hut and peeked around the corner. I saw Old Crab on his hands and knees, looking around the corner of the next hut. I suspected at first that he was about to steal something from one of the villagers, but it was unusual for him to do it so secretively. His normal tactic was merely to walk in and take whatever he wanted. I followed him and saw him approaching a young woman who was nursing her baby. She was seated on a pile of straw facing the morning sun. Old Crab approached her stealthily from behind and bent down and wrapped his arms around her. She struggled for a moment but stopped when she saw it was Old Crab. She put her baby down on the blanket and turned to him. Her full breasts swung loose from her open blouse. "Don't worry," Old Crab slurred. He covered her breasts with his open hands. "I won't squeeze them hard enough to steal your milk. I just want to have some fun." He circled her waist with one arm while he loosened his trousers. She lay down on the straw beside her baby and said in mocking protest, "No, no, no. "You shameless old man." At the same time, she was smiling. "And what do you have for me?" How would you like 10 work points today?" He said as he kneaded her breasts. She loosened the waist of her trousers, and when she lifted her hips to pull them down, she began to turn her head in my direction. I jumped back before she could see me and hurried to school. Old Crab was both the law and the chief law enforcement officer of the village. He dictated reports to brigade officials about the villagers who behaved suspiciously in his eyes or who were not sufficiently revolutionary. These people were called in for questioning, and Old Crab's complaints became part of their record. He brought news of party policy and rules back to the village. The illiterate villagers knew only what he told them about dictates and commands from party headquarters in Beijing. Several women whispered to Mama that Old Crab had become a party member because he was the cruelest man in the village, and local party officials were looking for a cruel leader during the famine years. Party officials at the brigade level appointed him team leader and gave him control over the distribution of food in the village. He decided who received food and who did not. He determined whose children lived or died. Food was kept in a central storage facility, and anyone caught trying to steal was shot in the head on the spot. No one forgot those years. Half the villagers starved to death during the famine. All members of Old Crab's family survived. When the famine ended, he was granted party membership in a lavish ceremony at brigade headquarters and praised for his selflessness, service to the nation, the party, and the people of Gao village. End of chapter 35. Chapter 36. Papa unexpectedly arrived in Gao village one spring day. He had taken the bus to the nearest main road junction and walked the final few miles. He told us that before releasing him from Nan village, Communist Party authorities had one final humiliation in store for him. His work contract with the university was cancelled. Not only was he deprived of income, but he also was denied access to the national medical care system. In the eyes of the state, he had become a non-person. At the same time, university officials discovered the deception that had allowed me to stay in the PLA hospital in Hefei. They billed my mother for the cost of my medical care. The charge was 2 months of her salary. We never learned if Comrade Pan and the kind PLA representative had also been disciplined for their role in saving my life. Father had been in our hut only a few minutes when Old Crab arrived with a number of villagers trailing behind him. Father presented his release papers to Old Crab, who scanned them but could not read them. After pretending to examine them, he crushed them in his hand contemptuously. "Huh! The most important thing for you to remember," he spat at Papa, "is that I am in charge here. You do what I tell you. You obey me." Of course, Papa responded deferentially. Old Crab studied him and added loud enough for everyone outside the hut to hear. "You are a piece of meat on my chopping block. I can slice you, I can dice you, I can cut you any way I want. And I will when I feel like it." "I understand," Papa replied, and the rest of us stood around close-lipped, listening to Old Crab's tirade. "And one more thing," Old Crab added. "Do you have any cigarettes?" Papa withdrew a pack of big Iron Bridge cigarettes from his pocket, and he was about to pour one out. Old Crab snatched the entire pack, shook out a cigarette, and stuffed the rest in his own pocket. "Match?" he asked. Papa lit the cigarette with a wooden match, and Old Crab turned and left. The others followed. During the next days, Old Crab spoke with Papa at length about his background. He was delighted that Papa could read, write, and do math, and was also completely under his thumb. Old Crab needed someone literate to help him, he said. "I've always hated depending on a man from the brigade level to do our numbers. They don't appreciate our local problems. Now, I have you." He put Papa in charge of recording work points that he assigned to every individual in the village. Papa was given the account book, which Old Crab retrieved from brigade headquarters, and told how the work points were to be distributed. Each male was given 10 work points for a day's labor. Women were paid 7, and children were paid 3. 10 work points were worth 20 fun. Old Crab assigned himself 10 work points a day. He told Papa that his work for the party and the supervising others was the most important job in the village. After only 1 month in the village, Papa became so sick that he could not walk to Old Crab's hut to fill out the account book. He'd contracted malaria. So Old Crab brought the book to him each evening. There was always a lot of illness in the village. People washed their clothing in the same pond where they drew their drinking water. On the opposite side of the pond, villagers washed their night soil buckets. We poured alum in our water before boiling it. Mud and other solids collected at the bottom of our water jar. We used only the top portion before emptying it and drawing fresh water. After that, Papa ran a high fever once a month and often became delirious. He tossed and turned in the bed and was drenched with sweat. During these lapses, he repeatedly shouted in English, "Long live Chairman Mao!" then laughed hysterically at his own words. I understood a little English and recognized what he was saying. Mother worried that he might shout something in Chinese and someone might hear and report him. He could get into serious trouble because of the tone of his laugh. He might be labeled a counter-revolutionary. As long as he stuck to English, the villagers thought he was speaking nonsense and he was safe. I was the sickliest child in our family. Every few weeks, I became so ill that villagers had to carry me to the commune clinic on a bamboo pallet. On my first stay at the clinic, I found, when I went to use the latrine, that a copy of David Copperfield was about to be used as toilet paper. As I squatted over the concrete platform, I picked up the book and read the first page. I realized how much I missed the written word and remembered my excitement at discovering the little hill of books outside the building in Hefei. I kept reading until I heard someone coming. I then stood up and tucked the book into the front of my underwear and pulled my shirt over it. Another woman entered, saw me, looked around for the toilet paper, found nothing, and left. As I went out the door, she returned the latrine, carrying another large volume. I kept the book under my pillow. In the following days, I was able to rescue parts of Anna Karenina and A Tale of Two Cities. I brought them home with me when I was well. Each time I stayed in the clinic for one illness or another, I stole several volumes of toilet paper. Not long after Papa arrived, Old Crab received funds from the commune settled-down cadre office to build our family a new dwelling. He pocketed the money and ordered the villagers to construct a hut. It consisted of mud walls and a dirt floor and was partitioned into 3 rooms. Old Crab did not want to build our home on good rice land. The area where they built our shed, we learned, was the old Gall family cemetery. The villagers were superstitious about this plot of land, and Old Crab ordered that no one was to tell us that we were living over the bodies of the Galls. Gall was the name of the family who had founded the village hundreds of years earlier. Many of them fled during the Taiping Rebellion a century before. Still more fled during the war against the Japanese, and some of those who stayed behind were murdered. Some fled during the Civil War. With the victory of the communists, those who remained were arrested, charged with exploiting peasants and executed. Others were sent to prison camps. During the Great Famine, we learned, the last Gauls had starved to death, deprived of food by a decision of Old Crab. By the time we arrived, there were no more Gauls in Gaul village. The dominant family names were Li, Sun, Zhang, and Chen. Not far from our newly constructed shed was a narrow drainage ditch that was part of the irrigation system. It carried water from a pond to the rice paddies. A tall gravestone with the names of Gaul family members etched on it lay on its side and served as a bridge over the ditch. Other huts in the village were built more steadily than ours. The villagers had used real fired bricks for their own structures and mud for ours. They had not bothered to create a window, so the only light entered through the open front door. This was what Old Crab had ordered to save both time and money, and we could not object. Once the workers were done, Papa had a neighbor help him punch a small hole through the wall at each end of the house, a rudimentary window for additional light and ventilation. Mama hung material over the holes to provide privacy and protection from the elements. The door remained open throughout the day. If we closed our door, villagers whispered that we were doing something secretive and suspicious. Before long, Old Crab would come along and kick the door in to make sure nothing was happening that he didn't know about. My parents never complained openly about our treatment or our living conditions. We tried to live like the peasants. We worked in the fields, attended every village meeting, and did as we were told by Old Crab. The allotment of food we received in exchange for our work was never enough. So we augmented our diet, as many of the villagers did, by raising chickens. We started out with 10 chicks Mama bought at commune headquarters. They matured and laid eggs and hatched more chicks. They lived with us in our quarters. My older brother and I shared responsibility for raising the chickens. We kept them in a coop that he made. Just before dark, when I called to them, "Coo-coo-coo, coo-coo-coo-coo," they came running to the house to be fed and kept beside his bed. They were healthy and became legendary in the village for their number and size. Within a year, we had more than 100 chickens. The secret of our success was that we raised them scientifically. Papa had discussed raising chicken with a doctor whom he befriended at the clinic during one of his visits to me. The doctor told him about antibiotics that could be given to our flock. The doctor provided him with some. I injected them into the chickens. But our success made some villagers jealous. They wanted to raise chickens in large numbers too, but failed. So they turned to stealing ours. Old Crab didn't have to steal. Whenever he wanted a fat chicken for his pot, he merely stopped by and took one of ours. The village collectively owned 4 water buffalo. The animals were highly valued because they were the only real labor-saving device available to the peasants. During the famine, villagers ate the water buffalo, and the men yoked themselves to plows. Families with teenage girls were assigned the care of the buffalo. In exchange, they were given work points. The girls tended the animals when they grazed, took them to streams to drink, fed them hand-tied bundles of rice and straw, and fenced them in their yards at night. Our neighbors, the Chen family, were assigned the care of one of the village animals. Chen Chunying, who was 15, 3 years older than me, led the buffalo into a pasture every afternoon. Soon after meeting her, I began to accompany her. We rode together on the back of the buffalo and steered into a grazing area near the river. Then we sat on the ground and talked and sang while he foraged nearby. One afternoon, Chunying began making a pair of shoes. Peasants wore shoes only on special occasion or during the winter, and they always made their own. Where did you learn how to make shoes? I asked, fascinated by her deft cutting and sewing. My grandmother taught me, she said. Didn't anyone teach you yet? My grandmother died, and my mother doesn't know how. Then I'll teach you, she said. You can watch me, and after you learn, you can make shoes for yourself. So I watched and listened to her instructions. She made the shoes from old clothing, shirts and trousers that were too ragged and patched to be used anymore were cut up into small, flat pieces of material. Chunying meticulously glued them into thin layers with paste made from a mixture of flour and water, and laid them out in the sun to dry into a hard material. Then she made hundreds of tight little stitches in them to hold the pieces together. I watched as the sole and the top of the shoe slowly took shape. The work took several weeks. I was fascinated by her patience and artistry. One night, I asked my mother for rags so I could make my own pair of shoes. Making shoes? She asked. What in the world is that good for? Read books. That will give you a future. I told Chunying I was not allowed to make shoes. She thought for a while and said, How about this? I will make you a pair of shoes, and you read to me while I am working. Really? You really will do that? I asked excitedly. Yes, I will, she answered. Read me beautiful stories, and I will make you beautiful shoes. We had brought a few books from Hefei, Papa's prized copy of Jean Christophe and Les Miserables, and I had stolen some from the latrine at the commune clinic. Mama kept our books in the pile beside the stove and told any inquiring visitors that these were for fuel. I carried a copy of Les Miserables with me the next afternoon. We sat on the grass, and Chunying sewed, and I read aloud to her. She loved the passages describing the life of Cosette. She often asked me to repeat the words slowly, and she closed her eyes and listened to me. One warm, lazy afternoon, she said, I admire you for being able to read, Yimao. How can you do that? And such fat books. I told her, if you come to school with me, Chunying, you can learn to read too. It's not as hard as making shoes. My parents tell me it's a waste of time, she replied. I have wanted to go, but they refuse. I've always been curious, though. That's funny, I said. My parents say making shoes is a waste of time. What do you think? Do you think we're both wasting our time, Yimao? No, I don't, I told her. She smiled at me and said, but you will be, unless you keep reading. Where are my shoes? I asked, and we both laughed. Each day that summer, we took the water buffalo to the pasture, and I read Les Miserables to Chunying. When my eyes tired, I sang her the songs I learned in school. She was so easily amused. It was as if I were an opera performer, and she was my only audience. I had been taught the songs from Madame Mao's approved operas, and I sang them to her and told her the stories. She listened and smiled. When summer vacation was almost over, she completed making my shoes. They were exquisite. The soles were white and the tops were embroidered with tiny, colorful flowers. How beautiful, I gasped when she handed me the shoes. I could hardly believe they were mine. I ran my fingers over the little flowers and admired the elegant stitching on the white soles. You must wear them only on special occasions, she said, on New Year's Day or for a visit to relatives in other villages. That night, before I went to bed, I washed my feet in a basin. Then I put on the shoes. I didn't want to soil them on the floor, so I lay on my bed and held my feet over my head and walked through the air with them, as if I were on a cloud. The next morning, I asked Mama to take me to visit our relatives in Tianjin. She told me it was too far away. I said, But I want to go. I have to show them my new shoes, Mama. I'd be happy to walk barefoot just to put on my shoes when I get there. Those shoes have made you silly, she said. Put them away. I knew of no place to wear them in the countryside, so they became a special, unusual treasure. I took them out every night and put them on and walked in the air. They never touched the ground. 10 months later, there was a special occasion for me to wear my shoes. As we sat in the field tending the buffalo, Chun-Ying began to sob. What's wrong? I asked. I'd never seen her so sad. I'm going to be married, she said. Then why are you crying? Because I have to move to another village. Because I'll never see you again. Because I've never even seen my man. I'll visit you, I said. No matter where you go, Chun-Ying, I will visit you. Her marriage had been arranged by her parents, as was the custom in the countryside. According to village tradition, a bride and groom were not supposed to see each other before they wed. Their first glimpse of each other came on the wedding day. Because Chun-Ying's family was poor, they had worked out a special exchange of weddings with a family in nearby Bo village. They agreed that Chun-Ying would marry the son of the other family, and the daughter of that family would marry Chun-Ying's brother. No dowry was involved. The arrangement was considered balanced and fair. Chun-Ying worried because she knew nothing of her future husband or his family, only the name of their village. She hoped that he would not be cruel or ugly. She hoped he would not beat her. I was sad. Chun-Ying was my closest friend. Her marriage meant there would be no more stories or songs or shoes. We would never again ride on the back of a water buffalo together and watch the sunset over the flooded rice paddies. Chun-Ying's mother, Auntie Chen, asked me to be the special assistant for her daughter and accompany her to the groom's village. I was delighted. On the morning of the wedding, I put on my best clothes, a clean white shirt with a small green flowered pattern, and my least patched pair of dark trousers. I combed my long hair carefully and braided them to perfect plaits. Finally, I took out the shoes Chun-Ying had made for me. I tried to pull them on, but they no longer fit. I put them away sadly. No more Chun-Ying, no more shoes, I whispered to myself. on the verge of tears. I set out barefoot for Chunying's nearby hut. Many people had already gathered at the dwelling. Red paper squares had been pasted onto the door with golden double happiness cutouts. "Congratulations, Auntie Chen," I greeted Chunying's mother. "Ah, look at you," she said. She touched my hair. "Your braids are so wonderful. They're as thick as a baby's arm. When you get married, you will make a very pretty bride." I was embarrassed by the mention of my own marriage. I blushed and asked where Chunying was. "She's inside, getting her face opened for her marriage," Auntie Chen told me. "What is that?" I asked. She invited me inside to find out. 3 old women huddled around Chunying, who sat on a stool next to the window. Auntie Sun held a thread between her teeth and wrapped the other end around her middle finger. The thread was taut. She slowly rolled it over Chunying's forehead to scrape off the wisp of tiny hairs. Chunying's eyelids fluttered as the thread was drawn over her skin. She saw me and smiled without moving her head. "Are you opening her face, Auntie Sun?" I asked. "Yes," she replied, "because she is no longer a girl. She's now a woman. When you get married, you will have this done too." "Does it hurt, Chunying?" I asked. No," she said. "It tickles." "Don't talk," Auntie Sun reprimanded. One of the women combed Chunying's hair and tied it into a bun at the nape of her neck. "This means," another woman told her, "that from this day on, you're a woman and no longer a girl." The others nodded assent. Chunying stood, and the women disrobed her. Once she was naked, they dressed her in red undergarments, red trousers, red shirt, and a red head covering. A red veil was pulled over her face. One of them brought in a pair of elegant red shoes. I recognized them immediately. For weeks, Chunying had worked on them as I read to her. On the toe of one shoe, she had embroidered a green dragon, and on the other a golden phoenix. These were the symbols for happiness and a good marriage. Chunying sat down and lifted her feet, and the women put the shoes on her. But to prevent them from touching the earth floor, they put another pair of slippers over the new shoes, an older pair. Chunying's brother announced breathlessly, "They're coming! They're coming!" I ran from the bedroom to watch. There was a flurry of activities, and someone shouted, "Quick, quick, close and bar the door." It slammed shut. Auntie Chen barred it from inside. In the distance, we heard gongs and drums approaching. We sat silently as they drew near. When they were outside the door, there was a series of explosions from strings of firecrackers. As the noise died away, someone began pounding on the door. "Open up!" he shouted. "Open up!" Others in the crowd repeated. Their chant became a song, and soon everyone outside was singing together. "Open the door, open the door. We are here for the bride. Let us in." For a moment, I was frightened and ran back to Chunying. She was sitting on her stool, trembling, her hands folded on her lap. People in the next room responded to the man outside. "It's not so easy, it's not so easy, not so quick for a girl from this family. You have to give us the red bag first." A woman opened the door slightly, and the red bag was pushed inside. The door was closed and barred again. Auntie Chang put the bag in her pocket. Another song came from outside. "Open the door, open the door. Time to take the bride. We must hurry home." People inside sang back. "Go away, go away. It's not enough. Go away." And so the lyric went back and forth until the door was opened and the groom's people came inside. As they entered, the women inside began crying and moaning. I watched in wide-eyed fascination. Auntie Chang cried, "She does not want to leave. You cannot take my daughter. You cannot." She was so convincing. I thought a struggle might break out. Yet, this was merely another village tradition. The women pretended to be sad. Soon everyone in the hut was crying. An old woman turned to me and said, "You are supposed to cry. Cry! Cry!" I couldn't squeeze out any tears, so I rubbed my eyes to make them red. Another woman whispered in my ear, "It's time to assist Chunying through the door." She led me to Chunying, who remained seated within a circle of crying women. The older woman showed me how to extend my hand. Chunying raised her head. I could not see through her well, but I saw a dark spot on the material from her tears, I thought. She took my hand and stood. The old woman cleared a path for us, and I led Chunying toward the door. It was difficult for her to walk, and she tittered back and forth, as if she might lose her balance at any moment. I didn't know who was more frightened between the two of us. We were both shaking like leaves. Just after Chunying crossed the threshold, she paused, and one of the women removed her old slippers and set them down inside the door. Every eye was fixed on Chunying. I led her out onto the path that passed through our village and into the countryside. As we walked, I heard her mother and father burst into tears behind us. At that moment, the gravity and the finality of this ceremony finally sank in, and I began to cry. Chunying heard me and gently squeezed my hand. The groom walked at the front of the procession. He seemed as nervous and self-conscious as I was. He was a common-looking man, nearly indistinguishable from all of the other young men who lived out their lives in the countryside. His face was round and ruddy, his eyes narrow. He was about the same height as Chun-Ying. He was not good-looking, but he was not ugly. We marched in a long line through several villages. In each village, people came out to greet us with singing and chanting. They good-naturedly teased the bride and the groom. The bride was supposed to be shy and say nothing, as the villagers laughed and shouted. Chun-Ying gripped my hand even tighter. Neither of us spoke during the 2-hour walk to her new home. Just outside Bao village, a delegation met us and led us to the home of the groom. Children came running to gap at the bride. A dozen tables were set up in front of the groom's hut for a feast that included everyone in the village and all of those who arrived from Gao village. Chun-Ying was seated at a table beside her husband. The villagers had killed and cooked a pig, so there was pork and vegetables for everyone. It was the best meal I'd had in months. I stuffed myself. I was seated next to Chun-Ying, who was so nervous she could not eat a thing. In the midst of such a festive occasion, I felt so sorry for my dearest friend. Everyone drank the village's special brand of liquor, a milky white concoction distilled from rice for special occasions. It was so powerful. Many of the people from Gao village observed that drinking it was like consuming liquid fire. In fact, one of the men touched a match to a glass of the liquor and it burned. The more people drank, the more they sang and the happier they became. There were scores of toasts, each one ending with people emptying their glasses and shouting, "Bottoms up!"